I think a lot of people are often kind of looking back on being like, oh, Dances with Wolves won over Goodfellas. Like, obviously, Goodfellas has a lot larger of a cultural impact in terms of film. I think it is rightfully seen as the more important of the two films, the better of the two films. So this is something that I think a lot of people like to relitigate, and it's easy to dunk on Dancing with Wolves. And I'm not going to come out here and say that Dancing with Wolves is a better film, because I don't think that, but I think it's interesting to look back on this within the context of the time period, because this ceremony was held weeks after the end of the Gulf War, in the dying gasps of the Cold War. And I think when you take the historical context of this particular Oscars year, it makes a lot more sense why Dances with Wolves won, because when you're putting Goodfellas versus Dances with Wolves up against each other, one film is reassessing the American empire and like trying to have this consciousness that is emerged from brutality, and centering this, this white American protagonist as this reinvented moral center. And I think it makes a lot of sense that this is something that people like really gravitated to when America was like thinking about who it's going to become in the wake of the end of the Cold War and coming out of the Gulf War. Whereas Goodfellas is something that is talking about how corruption is kind of at the center. It's systemic within the American capitalist society. And I can see how there is not really an appetite to award that perspective here.
Welcome to Oscars Outsider, your podcast about the awards race and Hollywood history. I'm your host, Dylan Ferguson, and over there is Craig Midwinter. Hey, Craig, how's it going?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Pretty good. Our special guest today is an old friend. Just when he thought he was out, we dragged him back in. It's Evan Petka. How's it going, Evan?
Good. How's it going, guys?
Going good. So today, just to let you know how things are going to go down, we usually start things off very briefly by going over any news or gossip that's come up in the Oscars race for this year since the last time we recorded. Then we're going to dive into our main subject for today. Today, our subject is going to be the Academy Awards of 1991. And then we're going to finish things off by talking about one of the nominees for Best Picture this year. So today, we're going to talk about definitely, I think, the most controversial inclusion among the Best Picture nominees, F1. And I'm glad to have you around with us, Evan, for this, because I know that you do follow the world of F1 and you can give us the fan take. So we're going to do that at the end of the show. Like I mentioned, when we start off, we like to talk about what's been happening in the Oscars race. We're about a month away from the Oscars now. We're headed into the home stretch. I don't know if I've noticed any important headlines in the past week since we recorded. Craig, is there anything that you want to talk about?
Well, I've always got my my hand on the pulse here, and you're right. There has not been a whole lot. There's been a little bit of mudslinging, or I don't know if this is an organized effort, but there was something that came up in one of the forums about Paul Thomas Anderson's citing the IDF as an inspiration while making a music video with Haim. Haim, I think is how it's said.
Haim.
Haim.
I think that's it. Something
okay.
Like that.
But so that has come up, obviously trying to maybe make a little bit of controversy surrounding One Battle After Another. Not sure how effective that is going to be. I think the coziness of Paul Thomas Anderson or anyone in Hollywood with Zionist ideology isn't really an attack vector that I think most of Hollywood is really going to care about. And we have not seen that be a way that anyone has been able to be dragged down here. So I'm not sure how effective that is going to be. Also seeing that Odessa Zion was called out for accepting a role and was accused of whitewashing, which she has since stepped down from in Deep Cuts, I think is the film. So don't know if that's going to play into things. Obviously, Marty Supreme is the film that is, I guess, most embroiled in potential controversy here. So but she is not nominated. So I don't think that this is necessarily going to have all that much of an impact. The only other things I saw was that Sir Ian McKellen had come out and said that he doesn't get Hamnet. He just said, I don't get it. So,
that's kind of damning because he's a big Shakespeare guy.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, wow,
yeah. I think that is actually maybe the most impactful thing that has happened this week. I haven't seen it reported in a lot of places. There was an article in The Independent about it, but aside from that, doesn't seem to be a lot of chatter around that. But it would be interesting to see if there is maybe this emerging reassessment of Hamnet before the voting period ends, and if that potentially impacts Jessie Buckley's her candidacy for the Best Actress, because obviously she is the best positioned to win anything from Hamnet. But I think Rose Byrne, how are we saying that one? Byrne. Okay.
I think Byrne.
Yeah. She seems to be gaining momentum with an Independent Spirit Award win this week where she won Best Actress. So it's possible that this race, which we thought was locked up, could potentially get interesting. I don't know how realistic that is at this point. Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of the big headlines aside from Robert Duvall dying. I think our in memoriam montage this year is going to be a juicy one.
That's what I was going to bring up. Actually, is the off the books race. I hate to, reveal our callous nature, but I think back in the day, we had a King of the Dead category, didn't we? And
the last person in the in memoriam montage is King or Queen.
Exactly, exactly. And I don't know what they're going to do with this. I remember one year they had a special call out for. 16 Candles. Who am I thinking of?
John Hughes.
John Hughes. They once had a special John Hughes. Like he wasn't like necessarily in memoriam, so that was a hard one to deal with. Does that get King of the Dead status? And in this, I don't know. Are we going to get Rob Reiner? Who are we going to get? Like that's right. That's one thing.
Diane Keaton is another one. Robert Duvall.
Diane Keaton's a big one. Duvall coming in late, that comes with a lot of impact. They might go the route that we had last year with Gene Hackman, where it kind of dropped right before the ceremony and they didn't include him in the montage, I think, but instead they gave like a special feature about him afterwards. I could see them doing something like that for Robert Duvall, just him getting his own special tribute. That race is also heating up. In terms of Hamnet, I would definitely like to see the race get a little spicier because, like you said, it has been a bit of a one-woman show in terms of Jessie Buckley pulling away from everybody else. I think that Ian McKellen's comments, I do remember coming across them and glancing over them. They weren't that different from what I said. I think when I talked about Hamnet, which I didn't really like, in the sense that he was like, I can't imagine this play that Shakespeare wrote coming from just a perspective of personal family troubles and grief. It had to have come from his broader social world and his immersion in the world of arts and all this stuff. I think he said something like that. I'm paraphrasing based on a half memory, but by the way, sorry, Ian, if I got that wrong. I know you love the show. But I think a lot of people are ambivalent about Hamnet too. I think he's not the only person in Hollywood who's feeling not super enthusiastic about it, though it has a lot of shooters too. So I wonder if maybe an increasingly tepid stance on the movie could hurt Jessie Buckley and her chances of winning. I don't know.
Yeah, but we also talked about Hamnet potentially being a player if there's this big split between Sinners and One Battle After Another. Like, it's possible that Hamnet comes up the middle there. I am thinking that is less and less likely of a scenario, but interested to see, like you said, how this impacts Hamnet overall. I see a scenario where it gets completely blanked. Like if the momentum keeps turning away from Jessie Buckley's favor, not saying that it is like fully a change of the tides right now, but if it kind of continues in this trajectory and people are just kind of only lukewarm, no one is really passionate about it, I could see this being a real surprise. It would be a huge surprise at Oscars that if she doesn't win. And there's a Best Picture. If there is
a split between Sinners and One Battle, and there is a third contender which emerges, which, as you said, seems very unlikely at this point. We're a pretty late stage in the race. I wonder if Hamnet would be the beneficiary of that. I wonder if maybe the people at Warner's identified Marty Supreme as the potential beneficiary, and that could explain why we've seen more negative press towards Marty Supreme than anything else. If there has been a coordinated attack on one of these movies, as we've discussed in the previous episode, it definitely does seem to be a coordinated attack against Marty Supreme. That the fact that we have two frontrunners that are from the same studio as well, because One Battle and Sinners are both Warner Brothers movies, that might explain both why we haven't seen many attacks against the two frontrunners. Because that everybody thinks, well, what's the point if one of them gets kneecapped? There's the other Warner Brothers movie right behind it, and since they're not going to really go into hardcore competition with each other because they're the same studio, that might explain that, and that might also explain why something that feels like third place at best, Marty Supreme, is getting an attack. Maybe Zaslav and company at Warner Brothers are like, well, we've got two horses at the head of the race. Let's just identify the closest third option to kneecap them and just make sure that we have the field clear for the final stretch. Just make sure we get another little finger on the curling rock at the as they say up here in Canada. Otherwise, I don't really think I've noticed much news or gossip. Have you been branched into the Oscars race this year, or have you been kind of clocked out?
Yeah, no, I mean, it hits my feed. I see it. And I think everything I've seen has been, I haven't seen any of this sort of, Paul Dano trashing of Hamnet, as you say, from Ian McKellen. But I actually thought we were going to have more of Marty Supreme in the race. I thought that was going to happen, but I also feel like, both One Battle and Sinners are Oscar, I wouldn't say Oscar bait, but, definitely movies I could see getting Best Picture for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we move on to our main feature today? We're doing another one of those episodes where we revisit a past Oscars. So today we thought we were going to cover the 63rd Academy Awards. That is the awards held in 1991 for the films of 1990. Craig, you suggested this topic, so why don't you lead us off here? What do you think is especially interesting or fun or Oscars-y about the 63rd ceremony?
So what I think is particularly interesting about this year is that this is something that I think a lot of people are often kind of looking back on being like, oh, Dances with Wolves won over Goodfellas. Like, obviously, Goodfellas has a lot larger of a cultural impact in terms of film. I think it is rightfully seen as the more important of the two films, the better of the two films. So this is something that I think a lot of people like to relitigate, and it's easy to dunk on Dancing with Wolves. And I'm not going to come out here and say that Dancing with Wolves is a better film, because I don't think that, but I think it's interesting to look back on this within the context of the time period, because this ceremony was held weeks after the end of the Gulf War, in the dying gasps of the Cold War. And I think when you take the historical context of this particular Oscars year, it makes a lot more sense why Dances with Wolves won, because when you're putting Goodfellas versus Dances with Wolves up against each other, one film is reassessing the American empire and like trying to have this consciousness that is emerged from brutality, and centering this, this white American protagonist as this reinvented moral center. And I think it makes a lot of sense that this is something that people like really gravitated to when America was like thinking about who it's going to become in the wake of the end of the Cold War and, coming out of the Gulf War. Whereas Goodfellas is something that is talking about how corruption is kind of at the center. It's systemic within the American capitalist society. And I can see how there is not really an appetite to award that perspective here. So that's really what I found the most interesting about this. I'm curious what you guys think. Have you seen any of these Best Picture winners or any of the Best Picture nominees?
So I'll say that when you suggested this topic, I was originally like, oh, you know what? This is actually a period where I'm like kind of ignorant about Hollywood history, that like end of the 80s, early 90s. When I looked at the Best Picture nominees, I got to say, I'd only seen one of them, and that was Goodfellas. I hadn't seen Dances with Wolves, and I'm ashamed to admit I hadn't even seen The Godfather Part 3 yet. So just to clarify what the nominees were that year, they were, in addition to Dances with Wolves, which won, Goodfellas and The Godfather Part 3, Awakenings, and Ghost, which was one of the biggest hits of 1990, a big summer release. I went in and watched Dances with Wolves for the first time. I watched Godfather 3 for the first time. I made sure I got the original theatrical cut of each, since both of them have like recuts that have kind of been pushing out the original since, and I wanted to make sure I saw the same ones that the Oscar voters watched. I have not gotten around to seeing Awakenings, and I've never seen Ghost either. Evan, are you well familiar with the films from this year?
Again, this is like as surprising to people as it is when you haven't seen Star Wars. But yeah, no, I haven't seen Godfather 3 actually at all. But you always hear it's the worst of them all. I've seen 1 and 2, but I have seen Dances with Wolves, and I actually do even have memory of these ceremonies from being a kid. And
oh, nice.
And even like the sort of my parents were talking about Dances with Wolves. They were talking about that more than Goodfellas. Like that was sort of, I think, I guess you would say like the more mainstream, accessible, popular movie at the time. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't Goodfellas. Goodfellas was probably just sort of still reserved for, like, it wasn't a family movie. I wouldn't say Dances is either, but I do remember that being talked about a lot, and trying to watch it even as a kid and being like, this is boring. I thought this was going to start off with like some action or something, like it's, I think, obviously Goodfellas would be the better movie. I think I agree out of all of those, but, not to skip right to the end, but I actually really loved what, Costner said about Dances with Wolves with his speech at the end of the ceremony. And I think him saying like, this is a special movie for, the people who it's about. And I thought that was actually kind of touching. And it also seems like that makes it in a way a good choice, because it does have something to say about America. Like it is more of like a true American movie. And if like you're saying, Craig, we're looking inwards at America and who America is, I think that does make a lot of sense. And I'd never really seen it, I'd always just seen it sort of from that, like, Fern Gully, Pocahontas kind of story, right? Just that recycled Avatar kind of story. And I always thought it wasn't, it wasn't the greatest movie of all time. It was the most creative or I guess novel story, but it kind of gave it some credence when I heard Costner at the end there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think with context, it makes a lot more sense as a winner. It's a more of a stabilizing narrative versus like something like Goodfellas, which is destabilizing, right? It's more of a critique of the system, whereas like Dances with Wolves, I think there's critique there, but it is also very safe. Like it's also saying like, yes, we are a country that is built on brutality, but we're also capable of being moral. And I think it's kind of forgiving. And I do think that it is a little bit problematic that this movie that is apparently for the people that it's profiling still centers itself around like a white protagonist. I think it just makes a lot of sense that this was what won within the context of this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I feel like the movie's perspective on white America is much harsher than what I feel like you're giving it credit for. It is definitely interesting that it comes out at that point, and I totally agree with both you guys that this is an interesting kind of case study, and like we are like right at the moment where the Berlin Wall has fallen, the Soviet Union is on its way out. America is trying to figure out what are we now that the enemy that has defined them throughout the Reagan years and for a long time is no longer there, and they have to find a new definition. But the image that we get of white American culture is brutal. Like everybody except for Kevin Costner, every white American that we see is like nasty, gross. Either they're extremely cruel or they're just broken, suicidal husks of human beings, without exception, right? Like it's an extremely brutal image of what white American culture is. And that's the thing that shocked me the most watching the movie for the first time. It's like it does kind of simplify it too, because there's like no question in the movie and within the world of the movie that Kevin Costner is making the right choice, because the Sioux that he finds himself with are presented as basically just all great people. And then the white Americans that he leaves are all just nasty, broken, horrible people. So it's very black and white in the movie, but I did find it kind of shocking that that was the image that he would project of America, at least at that time. But like you say, you have to always watch a movie, even if it's set in the past, as a reflection of the present moment. And it felt so disaffected and so cynical. I was actually really taken aback by that. It's also, I think, and if you put this in terms of Hollywood history, it's kind of interesting too, because if we're at a time where America is trying to figure out who they are now with the Cold War collapsing, Hollywood is also, I think, trying to figure out what they are. And the Oscars, in terms of awarding what they want the world to see as their best movies, are in a bit of an odd place here. The 1980s wasn't necessarily super kind to creators. The kind of 1970s new Hollywood period, the traditional narrative is that it started to fall apart after the disaster of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate in 1980. And there was a lot of really good American movies, I think, in like 81, 82, 83. But after that, the studios really managed to reassert control, and the kind of huge control that directors had won for themselves in the 70s, which was epitomized by The Godfather and by the films of, the two stars of the Hollywood of the 1970s, Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, that kind of freedom and financial power that they'd gained had been peeled back, and there was a lot of studio control and a lot of appetites, I think, for Hollywood in Reagan's America were towards spectacle and less towards the kind of dark, cynical, morally ambivalent movies that were popular in the 1970s. So I think it's interesting that when we get to 1990 and we're at this period where Hollywood has to kind of figure out, like, what are we at this point, that we have this kind of return of those heroes of the 70s. This is the only Oscars where a Martin Scorsese movie and a Francis Ford Coppola movie competed for Best Picture against each other.
That's really interesting.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, if you asked that as a trivia question, would you have gotten that right a week ago before we started looking at this? That's kind of a surprising trivia question. So the 80s was... it was especially hard on Coppola, obviously. Scorsese had a bit easier, but still they were not like... Scorsese and Coppola's movies weren't winning Oscars throughout the 80s. They both made a number of movies. They both did a lot of more experimental directions with their work. They tried out a lot of different genres, a lot of different techniques. For Coppola, of course, he famously kind of went bankrupt after One from the Heart, where he invested millions and millions of his own money into it, and ended up bankrupting Zoetrope Studios when the movie was a bomb. And he spent the 80s trying to kind of recover his financial situation after that.
Is he doing that again?
If that hadn't failed, we would never have got Jack.
Exactly.
I mean, I think Coppola made a lot of really good movies in the 80s, but they were basically all bombs except for The Outsiders. The Outsiders actually did well. Yeah. So throughout the 80s, Paramount had been trying to bring Coppola back to do a Godfather Part 3. And he had been saying no, no, no. And for a couple points, Paramount almost went forward without him. They ended up not doing it. And then eventually, I think by 1988, they convinced him to take like $6 million plus a cut of back-end profits to come back and do one more. And so it was really his financial straits which backed him into doing this. And then Scorsese, he made all kinds of movies throughout the 80s. But hadn't really shown an interest in returning to kind of the New York mobsters of Mean Streets, the movies that kind of made him famous at first. It was really when he found the book Wise Guys by Nicholas Pileggi that he was really taken with it and decided that he wanted to return to the world of New York mobsters and make one more. And so I just think it's interesting that at this juncture, we have kind of the return of Scorsese and Coppola as like Best Picture nominated directors at the same time as they both return to kind of the material that originally made them famous in Hollywood.
I would even add more to go into the weeds. You even had the return of Walter Murch too, experimenting with, because didn't Murch do Return to Oz? And then he even came back as an editor, and he was, famously has been Coppola's editor for I think most of his movies. Yeah. And he comes back with 2 nominations for editing and loses both of them to Dances with Wolves. And, I think Murch is sort of like the voice when it comes to editors. If you've ever read, Michael Ondacier's Conversations with Walter Murch, it's like, to me, that's like the film book to read. That is like,
nice.
The film Bible, in my opinion. It's an amazing book. And so that's what really caught my attention, was that we even had Murch in the ceremony as well for 2 movies, and he lost out.
Nice. Yeah, it's an interesting period for me now that I like start to think of it, because we're also kind of on the cusp of like the American independent cinema movement that would start to kind of revive Hollywood, as we've talked about when we covered the 1999 Oscars. The previous year, Sex, Lies, and Videotape did have a nomination for Best Original Screenplay. This year, we see a nomination for Whit Stillman's Metropolitans. So there is kind of like the first little glimmers of the American indie cinema renaissance, but we're not there yet. We're still kind of in that like no man's land of like the 80s studio supremacy. And we get this like last little aftershock of the new Hollywood Titans getting into the Best Picture category together one last time.
So what did you guys think about this like ceremony as a whole?
I thought it was interesting that they were kind of saying this was like the centennial of filmmaking in general. Like they were kind of claiming this as like 100 years of film in 1991. I guess because of I guess were they counting that back to the Lumiere brothers? I assume.
Well, yeah, they were counting it back to Edison's patent, to Thomas Edison's patent for his camera.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Lumiere brothers thing that they show takes place in 1895. But obviously there are tons of different points you could choose and say this is the origin point of cinema. It's a bit of an American-centric definition to say it's when Thomas Edison patented his camera.
Yeah. So it was, but it reminded me of how they've always tried to revive the ceremonies by, doing this sort of like, let's feel good about, let's go back and look at the legacy of film. Let's put together montages and, get excited about, the importance of filmmaking and all this. Like it just had that vibe. And I think we've seen that, I think every 5 years we see that, in the ceremonies. And it kind of was, it was funny to see that again, even back in the 90s, that they were kind of still going for that whole, let's make our industry important again by putting together montages.
We've seen some version of that in basically every Oscar year that we have decided to cover so far. It's interesting. I think that this one was maybe the best treatment of that from my perspective. I thought that like I could see how it was like a little bit dry. I think it did go into a little bit of a history lesson territory, but I I thought overall it was pretty good in terms of how it kind of treated that and used that as like a foundation for this. It felt pretty cohesive, and I thought that it was well paced, but I could see how it might be dry at the time if you're just wanting to see the winners. But it was a fun one for me to revisit.
I will say, just as a dork, as a history lesson, it's pretty inaccurate. There was the first like Lumiere brothers paying public spectacle was held in that cafe in Paris in 1895. Like they say it's the first time there was like a public spectacle of movie being screened, which isn't true. There are like earlier ones in both New York and Berlin and in Hamburg. But whatever, it's the first Lumiere ones, the first Lumiere brothers screening where there's actually a paying public. So they got that sort of right. The movies they show, though, are not accurate. We know which movies were shown that night because we have playbills that survive. They show 3 movies: Notre-Dame de Paris, Repas de Bébé, and L'arrivée d'un train au gare de la Ciotat. Only one of those, Repas de Bébé, was actually shown. The one where the little baby is eating some sort of white cream. That's the only one that was actually shown that night. Notre-Dame de Paris was not shown there. And crucially, their big centerpiece, which is the L'arrivée d'un train, the one where the train comes to the station and everybody freaks out, that was not shown that night. That was not as part of that showing. The premiere of that film was probably held in La Ciotat, which is where it was filmed and which is where the world's oldest movie theater still stands. I've been there. It's really cool. It's a really cool temple to cinema. And they hold that that's where the first public screening was. But I know that some scholars say that it was actually held in Lyon instead. But either way, it was not held in Paris. And also, I think this is maybe well known by now, but the idea that people, when they saw that movie for the first time, like freaked out and started screaming and running out of the theater because they're panicked, that's a myth. That did not actually happen.
It's like
Like I know that is a myth, but I love how that is continuing to be a way that films are marketed. I love that this is kind of like echoed throughout history, where it's like, oh, this was so gross, people were vomiting and everyone freaked out. That is, I really love that thread that can be traced all the way back to that premiere.
It is fun that the Oscars embrace that as like a foundational mythology. Like the first screening ever, people were screaming and running away. That's how intense and impactful it was. And so I definitely accept it as like a myth. And the funny thing about that myth is it took on like very quickly. Like we have examples of like 2 years after the first screening where people are making fun of the bumpkins who saw L'arrivée d'un train screaming and running into the theater. So it became a myth really, really quickly. People really liked that.
We just got desensitized so fast to film. Like it didn't take long.
So at a certain point, you just got to embrace the mythology and say that it's a fun legend. And it is kind of a fun starting point to transition from that to the dancing. I thought it was really tacky and just a little too bad taste and over the top in terms of the whole spectacle. But whatever, that's fine. Like it's the Oscars. That's what you're here for. It is funny also that 2 years earlier, the Oscars in 1989, they had kind of a notoriously over-the-top opening number that was considered a disaster at the time. They had like this 12-minute opening number. The centerpiece was Rob Lowe doing a duet with Snow White, and it's just horrible. Very bad taste, very tacky. If you haven't seen it, look it up. It's not on the official Oscars page. You'll have to find it somewhere else. It's not on the official Oscars page, apparently, because they never actually got the rights from Disney to use Snow White. So they got the Oscars have a copyright strike. I'm sure they're happy that they don't have they have an excuse to not show that. But that was actually considered like broadly as being a disaster for the Oscars, not because it had bad ratings or anything, but just because everybody hated that number. So for the next Oscars in 1990, the Academy president Carl Malden said that they were going to rectify the damage that the last Oscars show did to the Academy's reputation. That's an actual quote from him. And that was the first Billy Crystal Oscars in 1990. And they didn't even have an opening number. They were so gun shy that they did it without an opening number. And then I think some people found that a little bit lame. So now we get to the one we're talking about, 1991, and they go back to doing a kind of extravagant, tacky, over the top opening number. It's just funny how the pendulum just keeps swinging. It's like that Italian saying, Papa Grasso, Papa Magro. After a fat pope, there's a skinny pope. Every overcorrection has to be overcorrected. the next edition. The Oscars are sometimes like that.
I liked Billy Crystal's song. I think that he did a great job carrying this. I think we have seen some of these opening numbers where they're just like over the top. They bring in so much support. So to see him carry a number entirely on his own, I thought was really great. The dance, it's crazy how heavy the 90s were on interpretive dance accompanying like everything in a ceremony. So I mean, I could take or leave that. We see that throughout all of these Oscar ceremonies, and to add in an unnecessary number was a bit much for me. But I thought, like, obviously Billy Crystal's one of the best to ever host, so it was really fun to see it.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that about the year prior where there was no opening number. To think of a Billy Crystal's Oscars without an opening number is really like fascinating. wonder how like he would set the tone, because I think
what I mean is there wasn't a big dance spectacle. Billy Crystal did do a thing where he sung a song about the different nominees, which he redoes this year. He says something about it, like, last year, because we didn't have an opening number, I had to sing a song. So I wanted to do that this year. Just kidding. I'm going to do it anyways. They do double down. They do both of it this year.
Oh, okay.
There was no song and dance
sense.
routine with a bunch of extras coming out with costumes and music and stuff.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the whole thing felt sort of like really pared down, like really, just the fact that a host could just stand there and sing was without any visuals, no one even, even though there was this other opening number, the fact that Billy Crystal could entertain the audience and be trusted to just sing and dance with nothing else around him, I thought that was pretty amazing. Like, we couldn't really get away with that these days. I don't think there's one entertainer that we would want to watch who is literally just singing to us without flashy, video or extras or something else going on. It was, You
could do it if you projected Subway Surfers behind it.
Right. Exactly.
One thing I found interesting about Billy Crystal's routine, he does get to do a lot of jokes, and he gets a pretty good routine in there. A lot of it feels like pretty inside baseball. Like, he's making jokes about like, Orion, a studio in a coma, or like Paramount was waging war worse than Iraq or something like that, and makes some crack about Jeffrey Katzenberg torturing people. Like, it feels very like he's playing to the room, but I wonder how well that actually played to viewers at home watching on TV, because it really feels kind of like internal political jokes.
The review I didn't understand.
It felt like really biting. Like I was kind of surprised, because it feels like a lot edgier than what we expect from like a more modern Oscar ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, he makes the crack reversal of fortune, the Donald Trump story.
Yeah.
I guess of Donald Trump's bankruptcy that year. I think maybe his divorce too. That guy will never recover.
Yeah.
You know what I noticed too on the Donald Trump thing, and I'm not one to like, I just think, talking about Donald Trump gets so overdone, but the joke about Saddam Hussein, I thought was like really, he said something like, everyone will win this year except Saddam Hussein will think he was the one that won, something along those lines. I forget. And I thought this was before he mentioned Trump. And I thought, man, you could replace Saddam Hussein with Trump very easily in that joke, and it would still it would be funny. It'd be like, these days if you said Trump would think he won. I thought that was very interesting that you could easily replace those two. And then the other joke I didn't understand was the different strokes joke. Did you catch that one?
Oh yeah, I did not catch that. I did not understand that.
He
said something about like they're going to arrest every cast member of different strokes. I have no idea what that's referring to. Craig, do you have any idea?
Either.
No idea. I feel like there must have been a high profile arrest of one of the cast members, but I don't know. Also kind of interesting how of the ceremonies that we have watched, we get multiple ceremonies where they drag a horse on stage. I did like the car locking bit.
That was a good gag. Yeah.
So it's so stupid, but like I really loved it.
Yeah,
yeah,
that was pretty funny.
I did too. Yeah, and that was the that. And then he waited. It was interesting. He waited for the very end of the ceremony to advertise City Slickers. Like he waited to the very end. He's like, did you, I thought the horse was there because of Dances with Wolves. And then he waited to the end to say, I got a movie coming out. And to me, I love City Slickers. I grew up with that movie. I loved that movie. So that was cool to see.
Yeah. I think City Slickers also has a win the following year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think is it Jack Palance for
that's right.
Supporting?
He did. Yeah, you're right. He did get it. Yeah.
Which is a very I think that's a very inspired choice because you don't always see like comedies, kind of perform at the Oscars. So I like that a lot.
It was a deep comedy. It was a good comedy.
Speaking of nominees, was there anyone that, aside from obviously the nominees that we've talked about, that you thought were really like inspired or particularly interesting?
Joe Pesci did an awesome acceptance speech.
Yeah.
About 5 words, I think.
Yeah. It's funny. There was both his acceptance speech and then later the live feed they had of Myrna Loy, where from her apartment, and it's like this big long entrance live via satellite into her apartment, and she just says, "You have made me very happy," and that's her entire speech.
It's all the dialogue, all of that, just for her to say that. Yeah, really good.
It definitely did show that, like, even every other normal acceptance speech was relatively short compared to these days. Like it was just, I guess they were a little more conservative with their speech, speeches. they're talking. They would follow I assume they followed the countdown pretty closely.
I can't remember a single person getting played off these Oscars. Did anybody get
played off?
I
don't think so.
There was one of those, where they bring up a technical team and then the 2 guys talk and then the third guy tries and he gets cut off. There was one of those. There was
Being the third guy who talks is always a risky proposition. Most of the time, you're not getting a single word in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did like Jeremy Irons giving a speech for winning for Reversal of Fortune, just because he shouted out David Cronenberg. David. He says something like, "Some of you guys know what I'm talking about, thanks to David Cronenberg." The backstory on that is that the year before he was in Dead Ringers and was incredible in that movie in a double role. And he had won like a number of like Critics Circles awards for that. So there was like a lot of buzz about him maybe getting the Oscars, and they didn't even nominate him. So some people saw him getting nominated and eventually winning for Reversal of Fortune as kind of a bit of a makeup win, possibly, for Dead Ringers. So I liked him having the class to shout out David Cronenberg. Surely the only time Cronenberg's been shouted out from the Oscar stage. So I thought that was cool as a big Cronenberg guy.
Yeah, I think that I've never seen Reversal of Fortune, so I was kind of surprised when I saw this acting quartet and saw that Jeremy Irons wins. Obviously, he's like great in pretty much everything you've seen. So that context is really, really great.
I've also never seen Reversal of Fortune, but I do find it funny that it's based on a book by Alan Dershowitz. I don't know. Alan Dershowitz is in the movie. He's played by Ron Silver. But I haven't seen it, but that's just a funny historical bit for me anyways. One acceptance speech I didn't really like was Michael Blake winning for best screenplay, because I thought it was a little too on the nose for like a white guy who wrote about indigenous people to literally bring up a Sioux woman and use her as a prop to parrot back his words.
Yeah.
Just put words in her mouth, just puppeting her. That felt like just a little too on the nose as like a metaphor for what he's doing in his movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I did find it interesting, like the Oscars has a long history of indigenous moments, with
Sashi Little Feather accepting for Marlon Brando for The Godfather.
Yeah. And no, it's an interesting one. I did think that, going back to Billy Crystal, I was like, he did sort of, come across as like a little, first of all, he said Indian. And I don't know if that was a common term back then in the 90s.
I feel like in
maybe.
like America in 1990, that was maybe not like
still
considered that bad. But I don't know.
But then he made fun of like the naming of like Dances with Wolves, or saying all his like relatives were like, what did he say? Like stand around the barbecue or whatever. He like made fun of that whole idea, and I thought that was a little politically incorrect.
Yeah, did not age well.
Yeah.
No, it did not. But yeah. What did you guys think of Kim Basinger doing the coming up, and was she high?
Yeah, but her joke just died. Like, she told a joke and not a single person laughed. I don't know if I blame her or if I blame the joke writer for assuming that would come off. They're introducing like best music right now.
Best music, best
music, and she's like, yeah, and doing it to music is always better or something. Tries to make a sex joke, and then not a single laugh. So I just felt bad for her because I thought that the joke writers just set her up with a stinker.
Yeah, and then Alec Baldwin didn't help by just like going like this. I felt like it kind of reflected
I felt like that was him
her.
trying to sell the joke, though. I thought that was him trying to like help her out and be like, guys, you got to react to this. Oh no, it's embarrassing, right? No, didn't work.
Yeah.
No. I did like if we could just like mention another like montage moment, because they love the montages that as we've said, but I did kind of like the one montage where they got a bunch of celebrities to say like their first movie memory, or like I thought that was kind of fun. The one that jumped out at me the most was Ronald Reagan saying, I love Westerns because the good guy always wins. I'm like, what are you talking about? I can think of Westerns starring Ronald Reagan where the good guy does not win.
He's just too used to lying to the public. Yeah. So I guess that's what happens.
I love that this ceremony has emerged as like this theme of rewriting the American myth. Like it's just that's all we're doing here.
Yeah. Also, the segment with Tom Cruise confirms one of my longstanding beliefs, which is that Tom Cruise is always going to rhapsodize about how much he loves the movies generally, but you will never get him to name a single particular movie.
It's so true. It's so true, and it's crazy that he had that identity of like the true movie star all the way back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like for them to even say, they say the movie star is dead, but we still have one left, and it's Tom Cruise. They're still saying that.
Yeah. That is crazy how long that label has stuck with him. Yeah.
So I think that there are some interesting lineups in terms of nominees here. I think the most interesting one for me is the best supporting actor nominee list. I think it's really interesting that Al Pacino got this nomination for Dick Tracy, and how nominated Dick Tracy is. Like that's a movie that has like basically next to no lasting cultural impact, but it was like very prominent at this Oscars. I think it's got the second most amount of wins, and this is at a time where we don't have like a visual effects category. They just gave a special award for that category.
Total Recall, hell yeah. Love Total Recall. I was cheering.
But yeah, I just like the idea of Al Pacino being nominated in a year where there's a Godfather film, and
he's not nominated for it.
Yeah, he's nominated for Dick Tracy.
Yeah, I think that's really funny too. I also found it funny when they're running through the supporting actor nominees, when they're showing the clip of Al Pacino playing like Goomba number 7 or whatever the hell with like the prosthetics on his face. You can see Al Pacino in the corner because they do the picture-in-picture. He's mouthing along to the words. He's like really into it. He's not the slightest bit embarrassed. He seems super into his performance in that movie. So I'm probably more embarrassed about that than he is.
That probably would have been a better win than Scent of the Woman or Scent of a Woman. I think that there would maybe be looked back at a bit more fondly.
Yeah. Speaking of supporting actors, I am happy to see Graham Greene in there because I think he's always been an actor I've really liked. He always kind of reminded me of Robert Mitchum a bit. He has that kind of face and presence, and not too long ago he passed on to that Big Possum Lodge in the Sky. So I'm going to be watching the In Memoriam segment of the Oscars and hoping they don't overlook Graham Greene because he deserves to be in there.
Totally. Joe Pesci is a really good win. I also think that's great. Sure. He could have been nominated at least for his performance in Home Alone as well. I think that he's fantastic that year. So it's just great to see him get awarded there. Yeah. Catherine O'Hara, another person that died, and
I know
could have been nominated this year, I think, in a supporting capacity.
Yeah.
For Home Alone.
Yeah. Anything else about the ceremony that you guys wanted to talk about?
I feel like we've covered everything that I would like to talk about.
Yeah. How about the movies that are nominated for Best Picture? Like we've talked about Dances with Wolves a little bit. And I mean, the Goodfellas, I think, I don't know how much people are expecting it to win, but it did win a number of like Critics Circle awards that year. So it was definitely a heavy hitter. I assume that we can all agree that Goodfellas is a great movie that holds up. I mean,
totally.
You're not going to find very many Goodfellas haters out there. I would like to talk about The Godfather Part 3 because I just watched it recently and I'd never seen it before. So I know that, Craig, I think you are on record as a Godfather Part 3 hater because you brought that up in our previous episode where we rated our favorite Best Picture winners. And you had Godfather number 1 as your favorite, right? And Sean had Godfather Part 2 as his number favorite. There was a split there. Did you revisit Godfather Part 3 for this show, or have you seen it recently, or is it just like memories?
I have not seen it recently. Yeah, just memories of it being a complete letdown. Like, I remember watching this as a teenager and like making my way through the trilogy and just feeling like it dropped off a huge cliff for Part 3. I'm interested to know how it holds up now, kind of in isolation, as I assume you watched it.
Yeah. And like I said, I made a point of watching the original theatrical one because I think in 2020 there was the Godfather Coda, the death of Michael Corleone, as he called it. Coppola recut the footage to make it, as he said, more in line with his vision for the movie. So I haven't seen the recut version. I was surprised how much I liked Godfather Part 3, I'm going to say. I thought it was really good. I was enraptured from start to finish. I thought it was a really good movie. And I know that its reputation is as being a huge letdown. Obviously, that wasn't the universal reputation because it got a Best Picture nominee. So obviously there was a lot of people at the time who did enjoy the movie. But I think with time, that kind of became its reputation. And I get that a movie that's part of like an extremely beloved franchise is always going to face that kind of higher bar. But I feel like people were mean to the movie because I thought it was really good. I was really into it.
It's good. Yeah, I should watch it because I tapped out only because of what people say. Like I just was like, well, okay, I don't need to see Part 3, but I think people should see it. I guess I should see it.
I would be interested to revisit it now within like the context of today, just based on how there is this seemingly huge appetite in order to make legacy sequels right now. I don't know how that aligns with audience taste, whether that's something that we're going to see some pushback on, or maybe we already have seen some pushback on. But to view that within the context of today, where we don't get a lot of these like legacy sequels, and I think that you could say that Godfather Part 3 is a legacy sequel since there was such a substantial gap between that and Part 2. So yeah, I'm interested in revisiting it. Like I said, I think a lot of my opinion is just colored by watching these back to back as a kind of emerging cinemaphile.
Yeah, for me, what the strength that it has compared to the first two is that I think it gets more psychological than the first two does, that it, in the sense that it really drills into Michael Corleone as a character. they really drill down into his guilt, into his inner torment, his psychology. We get to understand the way his mind works more than I think we have understood any character in the first two movies. I think You Can Accuse the first two movies is awesome and beautiful and impressive as they are, as of being a little surfacey. They don't really get into the psychology, into the inner lives of the character as much. And The Godfather Part 3, in a way, kind of serves as a correction to that, in that we really kind of drilled out on Michael Corleone. I know at the time a lot of people really hated on it for having Sofia Coppola cast as Michael's daughter. A role was originally cast with Winona Ryder, and she had to drop out. And since Sofia Coppola is not really a professional actress, it shows in the movie, and a lot of people thought that was just a terrible choice. But I really like that performance. I think that it's really nice to have somebody in that role who is in a position where they have to be kind of very vulnerable and also be the moral center of the movie, have a performance that feels non-professional, that feels vulnerable to us, and that feels like more recognizably human and less and less performative. I think that helps the audience kind of identify with that character and helps her stand out from the rest of the cast in a way that is beneficial to the movie's themes. So I like that a lot. And also Eli Wallach is amazing in the movie as the old Don Altobello. So that's another really great performance, I thought. So anyways, I was surprised by how much I took to Godfather Part 3.
Okay, it's going on my list for reassessment.
Nice. Yeah. Otherwise, the one that I guess we haven't talked about is Awakenings. Has anybody seen Awakenings?
No,
it looked corny as hell from the clips that I saw.
I haven't seen it myself. No, I do. It does sound kind of interesting to me. This was a movie directed by Penny Marshall. So we have actually two actors turned directors in the Best Picture nominees. Penny Marshall played Laverne and Shirley, and directed a number of comedies. And I didn't know this about Awakenings, that it's actually an adaptation of the Oliver Sacks book about Oliver Sacks was a famous neurologist and writer who wrote about the patients that were in a kind of catatonic state and what happened to them when he started to revive them. I think it would be interesting to revisit it today because there's been recent revelations after his death that Oliver Sacks invented a lot of his research. And so I think a lot of his writing, I like his writing a lot and I will continue to enjoy it, but I think it's being reassessed by a lot of people as being semi-autobiographical and not so much about actual medical case studies in light of the revelations that he did a lot of invention. So it would be interesting to revisit the movie version of Awakenings, I think, in light of what we know about Oliver Sacks. Other than that, the fifth Best Picture nominee that we haven't mentioned yet is Ghost, the big blockbuster on the list. I've actually never seen Ghost. I'm obviously very familiar what it is from pop culture. Have you guys seen it? Are you familiar with the movie?
I haven't seen it, no.
Chunks on TV.
Yeah.
Yes, as a kid, just watching scenes here and
there.
Yeah,
I've probably seen a bits here and there. And like I say, very familiar with it from pop culture. But yeah, I've never actually sat down and watched the movie. Can't say I'm like super itching for the chance to do so. I don't know. Directed by Jerry Zucker from the Zucker Brothers comedy team, the guys behind Police Squad and Airplane and stuff. He made a somewhat dramatic movie, I guess.
I didn't know that. That's so
funny. Yeah, kind of an odd lineup of movies. You know what? I want to return to The Godfather Part 3 very quickly. I know I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it is kind of interesting to look at that in the lens of like the historical window that we're in, because that also is a movie where Michael Corleone is reassessing his legacy as he kind of reaches an older age, which obviously there's a bit of an autobiographical thing. You could really relate him to Francis Ford Coppola himself, especially with the, just when I thought it was out, they dragged me back in. That's probably how Coppola was feeling about being dragged back into doing another Godfather movie. Also, you know what? Quick sidebar. I think it's fun that between that quote and keep your friends close and your enemies closer, and I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. Each of the three Godfather movies has one quote which has really entered the popular lexicon that like everybody's familiar with, it feels. But I think also you can make an argument that that Michael Corleone's crime syndicate, which has always been kind of a metaphor for America itself, is also entering its kind of like post Cold War phase where
Yeah.
he's it's as powerful as ever, but now he has to deal with these European powers, these European bankers that make it clear that he hasn't regained supreme dominance over the whole world. The main enemy has been defeated, but now the European bankers are there and causing problems for him and making things difficult. So there is a bit of a connection to the historical period that America is in at that time. I don't know. Do you guys have any other thoughts on those 5 movies?
No, I feel like they have been covered pretty well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do we like Dances with Wolves? Do you guys actually like the movie or no?
I mean, when I finally rewatched it, like probably back in my teens or 20s, I did like it.
Yeah.
But I do understand the problematic nature of the movie. And so it also just seems like something I wouldn't need to revisit because it just does seem like the story has been rehashed so many times.
Yeah, it does really, and it goes back to kind of the Rousseau going native fantasy, or like you can date it back to Thomas Crusoe too. There's always this kind of ever since modernity has happened in like European and American cultures, there's been this recurring fantasy about like, what if we could go back to a simpler world? What if we could get rid of all the abstraction in our lives, which makes us feel disconnected from the meaning of everything, and just fight for our neighbor and live off the land and be directly connected to everything. So there's a very like old school fantasy element to it. And I think that's part of the thing that makes it feel kind of like, oh, we know this story because it's clear kind of fantasy that we've seen go through various iterations over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been a while since I have seen this movie, but I remember feeling like it felt very kind of trope heavy in like steeped in that going natives. But I don't think I'm probably not going to revisit this. So my opinion is still, I guess, very dated, and I just didn't care for it.
Yeah. I did watch it for the first time recently. I found it a little simple, like a little bit of almost like a child's fantasy. I don't find it that problematic. I think Michael Blake, the writer, and Kevin Costner really do want to be as respectful as possible and try to honor the Sioux culture as well as they can. Whether they achieve that or not is another question. I don't think they really show a ton of curiosity about like specifics of the Aglola Lakota Sioux that were the people that they're with there. And I know that they had some trouble trying to get like actual Oglala Sioux speakers. I think only one of the cast members is an actual native speaker of that language. And I know that for some people who are like Oglala, that was like a kind of a problem with the movie, was that the language wasn't well represented. Some of the historical stuff is not great too. They represent the Pawnees as being like the bloodthirsty, evil natives that they have. At one point, they're like, no, they're not here for the horses; they're here for blood. And it's like, okay, the Pawnees were actually like very persecuted by the Sioux at that period. So that's not necessarily historical, but aside from kind of like little lapses in this sort of simplicity of the thing, I don't find it like offensive or wrong at all. I think their hearts are very in the right place. I just think that the material is not like complex or deep enough for me to feel very engaged by it.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, just bringing back what I said at the beginning, it's, I really like Kevin Costner's just call it, people say they won't remember the best picture winner of the last year, but who will remember this will be, and he lists off the people who this movie might have touched. Yeah. And I think that was really cool. It was simple. It was, it didn't call you out and make you feel guilty or chastise you for anything. It just said like, we made a movie for a demographic, and they might really appreciate it, and we appreciate the that being recognized, and I thought that was good. I liked it.
Yeah, I did think Costner made a pretty good impression in his acceptance speeches, both for director and best film. He showed a bit of boyish enthusiasm, which was kind of charming, but he wasn't too over the top that you found it annoying. His suit jacket appeared to be about 3 sizes too big for him. Maybe that contributed to the boyishness of it. But whatever. I felt like instinctively kind of happy for the guy as a first time director. So, but I'm not going to be rushing out to watch Horizon: An American Saga Volume 2 anytime soon as well.
No. And I like how he follows suit with everybody who has a major Oscar win to go and make something like Waterworld. He really does, he really follows the Oscar rules to do. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's true. The Postman too.
Yeah. That's great. That's what you should do. Honestly, you win an Oscar, then you go big. Even if it becomes a disaster, you try to cash those chips while you still have them. When you still have that fresh clout, go for it. Try to do something big with it. That's what you should do.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, one more thing I want to say about the ceremonies is this is how my brain just worked just now. I thought about, I always think about Halle Berry as the one who wins her big Oscar and then goes off and makes Catwoman. Now taking Catwoman and bringing it back, I did not know Annette Bening was supposed to be Catwoman, and I learned that during these ceremonies.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, me too. When Billy Crystal announces her as she's about to play Catwoman in the next Batman movie, I was like, oh, didn't know that. And so I looked it up, and apparently she got pregnant, and that's why they replaced her with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh, no way. But I was watching her, and I was like, she would have actually made, we all say Michelle. I mean, I think a lot of people really like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman role. I thought Annette Bening would probably do a really good job, too.
I could see it. I could absolutely see it. Yeah,
I could see it. Anyway, that was interesting.
Yeah. Also, I guess one of the gossipy things that made this ceremony well known was that Madonna and Michael Jackson were there together. So they had the two biggest pop stars of the time in that brief window where they were pseudo dating, attended the Oscars together. Yeah. I felt a little odd that Michael Jackson was there and nobody referenced it or made jokes at his expense, but maybe he came last minute, so they weren't prepared for it.
Yeah.
But pretty big name musical performances too, when you think about it. You've got Madonna, Bon Jovi, Reba McEntire, Harry Connick Jr. all performing a nominated song in 1990. That's a big list of superstars.
Yeah.
Craig, anything else about these Oscars that we haven't covered? You think?
Nope. We're good.
I was just laughing. I was just literally thinking about a Billy Crystal joke and just started laughing again about his fax joke with Madonna. She faxed me and then I faxed her twice.
Also, the first back end deal, I really like that one.
Yeah, the back end deal. I know, because everyone was thinking about it. I'm like, how did he get that duck? How did he get that duck to quack? And then that was really funny.
There are some good jokes. He is good. He did a good routine, Billy Crystal, I think. Well, I think that we should move on to our last segment of this episode. We like to talk about one of the Best Picture nominees for every episode of Oscars Outsider, and we're down to only a couple left. So I think that when they announced the Best Picture nominees, there was one that kind of maybe surprised people more than any others. Craig was not surprised. Craig had called this, but they did give F1. The Kaczynski summer popcorn movie a nomination for Best Picture. So let's talk about it now. So Evan, you follow the world of Formula One, right?
I do.
Yeah, I don't.
I'm surprised. You're a Montreal guy and stuff. I thought you might be in there, but no. It's I'm one of the ones who I'm a bandwagon fan because the Netflix series Drive to Survive definitely pulled me in. However, I am a first season bandwagoner, so I beat everybody to the punch by watching it in the first season and then joining up just as the pandemic hit. So I've been a fan coming into 6 years now. I have to say, if, and I know it won't, but if F1 would win Best Picture. It would set the record for the very first movie to win Best Picture that is an advertisement. And I remember when I first saw the trailer, they show, I knew the movie was going to be called F1, but then you see the logo appear as the title for the movie, and you're like, oh yeah, they just went full into this. The movie is literally has a logo as its title. So titles may become logos down the road, but this is, I think, the first time where like an actual logo for something is the title of the movie.
Well, I think Barbie got a similar treatment.
Yeah, that's true.
Right,
Barbie does use the font that you see on the boxes, and I think that counts as a title logo. Good call, yeah.
Yeah, good call.
So as a fan, did you like it?
Yeah, and what did you think they got right or wrong about?
I did, and I think a lot of F1. I think the general consensus is that most F1 fans actually do enjoy the movie.
Okay, nice.
Lewis Hamilton, one of sort of like, he's like the GOAT of F1. He had a lot to do with the movie. So, he would supposedly, you never know, right? These are the way they market them. This is the way they market the movies. But they say, he was this sort of producer / consultant. And so if he was like, watching a turn, like they're going around this turn, like in F1, turns are like, as a fan, every turn, like, that turn, that turn, what happened at those turns in history. Like it's all very sort of mapped out in your brain as a fan. And so he made sure things like the way the car would sound as it shifted gears and stuff like that was accurate to those corners. And, they were trying to definitely go for more realism than, something like that Sylvester Stallone IndyCar movie or whatever it was. Yeah. Like they were trying
Rush.
to,
Rush. Driver. No, Rush is great.
Sure.
Rush is great. That's
Rush is good.
Howard
Rush is good.
I like Rush a lot.
Yeah.
The Sylvester Stallone one I think is called Drive or Driver.
Yeah, Drive, something like that. But anyway, and they did a good job. I would relate it to, and I know you're a baseball fan, Craig. So if you remember, I believe it was Rookie of the Year. One where the boy broke his arm and then he became like this crazy pitcher. He could just throw it. And then at the very end of the movie, they're like at the World Series or something and his arm just doesn't work. So they have to figure out if his superpower goes away. And so they have to figure out a way to win. And so they do a hidden ball trick, which is, it's a real thing. You can do a hidden ball trick where you pretend like the play is over, but you actually still have the ball in your hand and then you can tag the guy out. This is something that happens in baseball very, very rarely because it's very hard to do, but they showed it in Rookie of the Year. I would say that in F1, they do similar things like that, right? Where it's like, these are things you technically could do, but you don't see them very often or at all, but it at least gives you a sense of how things work. And so for a lot of F1 fans, they were like, yeah, you know what? Sure. I could imagine that happening. And even now, as you watch F1, people do kind of love it because like the commentary, like the color commentary during the races is the movie's referenced all the time. Like, oh, that's just like from F1, the movie. Like they talk about it a lot. Like, it definitely got people really excited in the F1 world. And yeah, it did a decent job and it was fun. And the movie itself, just from a movie standpoint, I think just, really reminded me of classic, I guess you could say 90s, just Hollywood. It was just a very simple plot. You had the corporate bad guy. It just felt like a good classic movie. There was nothing, it was entertaining enough. So for me, from just a movie standpoint, I was entertained by it. And I've always been a Joseph Kosinski fan. I don't know if you know, but one of his first breakout productions, I guess you could say, was the Halo. I think it was Halo 3 video game. It was a commercial that he did for the video game, and it was the one that was like a diorama of Halo. It was just like this model diorama, and the camera just like floated through the diorama, and Raindrop was a classical piece. I forget. And it's a made. You should look it up. It's one of my favorite commercials ever made. And that was one of his first entries into the world of film. And so he's always been. I think he's a pretty creative guy. I like his movies, and so yeah, that's sort of my take on it. Is it Best Picture worthy? Probably not, but it's sort of like a callback to, I think, just a nice classic story, and so I like it for that.
Nice. Craig, did you end up finishing watching this with your son? I know that you guys started watching it together.
Yeah, so we split this over like 2 watching periods because we reached bedtime. So, but I really loved this movie. Actually, this is definitely in the upper half of my rankings of the best picture films. So I'm curious as to how it resonated with you, Dylan. But I was not surprised at this being within the best picture categories, because I think that one thing that the Oscar voting body typically loves is honoring the production and honoring the craft of things. And this was a huge production. Like the logistics involved in putting on like an F1 event when there's no film that is being made is huge. And then trying to execute a like blockbuster feature length film while this is going on under so much scrutiny without giving away the plot and like pulling this off, huge logistic challenge that I think they executed super well. I don't follow F1 very closely, but my brother does. So I've kind of got like an idea of the moving pieces and who's who. And I thought this like really captured the excitement. I thought that there was really good performances. I thought that it was like really well shot. I thought it was really well paced. I loved the energy. It wasn't like, it didn't feel like a cheap marketing attempt. It felt like they were actually trying to build a film. So I thought it was like super well executed. So I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think I'm on record as having a real soft spot for sports dramas. And so it does like hit that sweet spot for me. But I'm curious what you thought, Dylan.
I definitely appreciate the like huge scale like Hollywood production aspect of it, because I do love a huge scale Hollywood production. I'm a sucker for that. I feel like a lot of people wanted to compare this movie to Days of Thunder, you know, because that was like Tony Scott's follow-up to the smash hit Top Gun, and this is Joseph Kosinski's follow-up to the smash hit Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun, yeah.
And all those movies are produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. I like Days of Thunder a lot, and I think it was nominated at least in the Oscars. We just finished discussing. For sound. I don't think it won any of them. I think the closer point of the comparison, though, would be Grand Prix, the John Frankenheimer movie from 1966, because that movie was also really built around the idea of we're going to go to the actual races, different places in the world, and we're going to use like the latest technology to film the best footage we can on location in different spots all over the world. And F1 kind of does that same thing. They're traveling to different locations and using the latest technology, including some very recent technological innovations to try to capture the best footage they can. I appreciate that aspect of it a lot. I saw this in theaters in the summer, and I had a good time. I don't think I'm as enthusiastic as you guys were. I didn't love the story. Like it's fairly tasty. Like it's fairly satisfying. I think there could have been like some more like conflicts that could have made it a little more interesting. Like really, when you've got the old racer, Suddy Hayes, Brad Pitt's character, and the young racer, you could have tried to have them like learn from each other a little bit more, I think. Instead, it's just like the young guy only has to learn from Suddy, and Suddy is always right in everything. Like the movie is so like on his side, and that it feels a little one note after a while. I think like Grand Prix, to just belabor that comparison a bit, Grand Prix had a really stacked cast with a lot of performers. I like Grand Prix a lot. Also kind of a simple movie, but I think that's fine for this kind of material. Being simple isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes that's good, but there was a lot of good performers. I think that in F1 it was just a little too relying on Brad Pitt too much. And I do like Brad Pitt. I like him in this phase of his career. Javier Bardem was good too. I'll give him that. Yeah. Kerry Condon was fairly good as well. So it's not like it's just a one man show. But I thought, as in terms of the plot, it was just a little too like on the nose, a little too simple. In terms of the race scenes, there was some really good work. My favorite was actually the first one, the Daytona sequence. The Daytona sequence I thought was awesome. Watching that in theaters, I was like really into it. What I'm watching for in a movie like this is I'm really trying to see like how good of a job they do in making it feel exciting and feel like you're there, but also making it feel legible so you could actually feel like you can follow where the cars are in position to each other. And I think that's maybe the hardest part of it. And I think they did a variable job of that. The Daytona sequence, I thought they really stuck it. They really nailed the angles and the editing. Some of the other ones, I found it a little bit messier. But the shots that they pull off are like very, very impressive. It works as like a summer blockbuster. I definitely had fun. I had a good time. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. If it had a little bit more story, a little bit more character, I would be more enthusiastic about it.
All right.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Still surprised it's there among the Best Picture nominees, though. I mean, it's not that surprising when you think, Top Gun 2 was a Best Picture nominee, but Top Gun 2 was also like a massive blockbuster that had like uniformly glowing reviews, whereas F1 was a hit for sure, but not like on that scale, and the reviews weren't as uniformly positive, I don't think. So I was a little surprised by that, that they would go with that over Avatar or Wicked, as we've talked before, in terms of filling that slot for like token blockbuster among the nominees.
Yeah, I have to admit, this is probably very unpopular, but I am a little surprised that we didn't get Wicked as a Best Picture, or get more, like any acknowledgement of that movie. Yeah. And I think it's because, honestly, a lot of people see it as like a movie that they're just trying to just rake in more money by splitting it into two. And so that really like rubbed people the wrong way. But no, I think you're right. I think it, if you're going to choose sort of like one very sort of like mainstream accessible movie, it would seem like Avatar or Wicked would be the better choice. However, I think because, Kaczynski is this, put the camera inside the cockpit kind of guy, maybe that plays into this very anti-AI, this seems like that's a big, obviously thing in Hollywood right now. And so, having a movie, they really want to celebrate movies where the camera is there in the action and we're not relying on much else. Right. So I think maybe that plays into it a little.
That's a good point, I think. I know James Cameron has said that he thinks Avatar didn't get nominated because of anti-AI backlash, even though he says he used no AI in the movie, but he thinks it's kind of downstream of that kind of anti-technology, doing it all in the computer sentiment. And I can kind of see that as being like, we want to, like, if we're going to celebrate a big blockbuster, we want to celebrate the one where things happen in camera rather than in computer. I think that's probably a good point, And it is nice to have one that isn't a sequel too.
Yeah, I think that this is like also functionally the idea of kind of validating this concept that we can have franchises that emerge from non-traditional sources. Like we know that studios love a franchise and being able to like build a world around intellectual property. To have something like Barbie previously and now F1 established these franchises and these intellectual properties that aren't necessarily traditionally narrative, like it's not based on existing written narratives. I think that is functionally very appealing to studios and opens up a lot of like fruitful ground for new franchises. So I think like validating this idea by giving it a Best Picture nomination is seen as a good thing to do from at least like production guilds and executive voters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that just about covers it, unless you guys have any final thoughts that we've forgotten to mention about any of these topics.
I think we're good.
Awesome. Good. Well, this was fun. Thanks a lot for hanging out with us, Evan.
Thank you. Do
you have anything you want to shout out before we wrap things up?
Sure. I mean, if I can,
yes.
My nerdy brother around Oscar season always loves to make his own little Excel sheets and things to do just tracking of nominations and everything. And he's always, competed in Oscar races, I guess you could say. So I'm here to advertise that he's working on, and it is available now, not on an app store, but if you visit Cine Race, so that's CINE race.com, you can access so far the web-based app, which is to track all of the nominations from all the ceremonies and build your own race so that you compete with friends. And it basically just tracks how many movies you've seen, and you can see how many movies your friends have seen. So if you're really involved in that death race Oscar game, you can now go and track your progress using cinerace.com.
Nice. Craig, anything you want to shout out?
No, just take a moment to venture down to the subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube or whatever platform you're listening to us on, so that you stay up to date. You can also check out OscarsOutsider.com, where we have the results of our fantasy season so far. So, check out what the Oscars Outsider Supercomputer says about how each of our picks are doing.
Yes, and let us know what you think about any of the movies or topics we've discussed in the comments. I'm Dylan Ferguson. You can find me on Substack. I write occasionally about movies there. Just look for my name, Dylan Ferguson. And we'll be back next week with another one. We'll get to react to the BAFTAs, which are going to be held on Sunday. And we have a really fun topic for you next time. We're going to be finally going back to the origins, and we're going to be talking about the first ever Academy Awards. So we'll see you then on Oscars Outsider.